Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I hope y'all are all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, unlike myself. I didn't get in till 12:05 this morning from Colorado. But so if I doze off in my own lecture, just ignore me.
Throw a piece of paper at you.
You don't want to do that. That's assault. We're going to talk a little bit about in chapter 13 about business continuity, and then in chapter 14 we'll finish out with some more policy stuff. I'm going to keep this as a very high level because you're going to end up with 3 classes on these. So you'll have ISM. You're going to have ISM, SSAC is a policy, and then you're going to also have, what's the other third? You have 3 policy classes. Anyway, my mind just went blank. The objectives for this one, we're going to talk about what environmental controls are, the components of redundancy planning, list disaster recovery procedures, and incident response procedures. What is business continuity? Essentially, it's how or what systems do I need to bring up to get my business back to a minimal state of functioning. Is everyone with me? You've got to understand that business continuity is, in its entirety, essentially just a plan and test mechanism to give you the fundamental basic controls and understanding of what you need to make sure that your business can function in the event of a disruption. That's all about business continuity is about. You'll list the servers, the systems, the personnel, the cost, all that associated together would be what your overall cost would be to reestablish yourself. Some types of disruptive events could be a power outage, a hurricane, or a tsunami. They could be a tornado, that affects you by doing other things. Business continuity plans, you got to identify the exposure or the threat, create a preventative recovery procedures, and then test those procedures to determine if they're correct. What's succession planning? You need to plan out who takes over for who in the event that person dies. Like for example, what's the biggest order of succession there is? Does anyone know? It's for the office of the President of the United States. There are 27 people that could take over his position.
Only 27?
If those 27 get assassinated, by the time it gets that far, there's going to be a war after whoever's doing it. So you might get away with 2. You might get away with 2, and then it all goes downhill from there. Business impact analysis. What is a business impact analysis? This is what you say, here are what my business functions are that I need to protect. So how do you do it? Well, you can send out questionnaires saying, well, what kind of disaster do you think we're going to have? To kind of get a brainstorming type of activity going. Then you can talk to those vital people in those different roles, like your IT managers, your security managers, your plant managers. Make sure that everyone is on board. Here's what an interview form is. Name of the business unit, how many employees, what their function is, who's above them, who's below them, what critical IT functions are there to bring them back. And quantitative, give me the financial aspects, the dollars. Qualitative, what are the emotional or feel-good types things that will happen to them. Recovery strategy and recovery time. This is always a big thing. Remember, your goal is to try to bring up your system back within 24 hours of it going down. Try. If a tornado comes wipe out your data center, you think you can get that up in 24 hours? No. Not unless it's has a fiber optic cable running to another one, and then you just switch a switch and it goes all the way over there. But speaking of, now let's talk about disaster recovery in the event we have a tornado. Now, a disaster recovery is part of the business continuity plan. It's also, business continuity is also known as contingency planning in the event of a disaster. It focuses on restoring and protecting those information technology assets. And you're going to want to know what MMTR is the mean time to restore. It measures the amount of time that you're going to need to reestablish those services to everybody. Disaster recovery activities, you're going to create, implement, and test those disaster recoveries, usually quarterly. A DRP will actually be written in a formal document, and I've written several of these. Basically what you do is you do a step-by-step guide on how to bring each server back up, to what applications on what server, to what port, every command that you type in to bring the system up from scratch. You'll create a book for that. And then store it electronically somewhere, and then on a CD in a fireproof safe. Yes?
Are we going to do that in Tulsa?
They don't have one yet.
Okay.
Da, 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 da.
We're not doing a coup, but we're doing a security audit.
A coup.
We will tell them that they need to do it,
Oh.
and then I'll end up doing it later. But or whoever they hire to do network security there will end up doing it. You,
And then he can oversee it and get you fired. It's perfect.
comprehensive in scope. You want to update it is anytime you do a update to your system. If you push a patch, you need to put a little section about the patch implementation. And remember, you need to do a disaster plan approach for each type of disaster. Not a whole DRP, but you need to give a functionality of what kind of disaster would occur and what steps you need to bring up. In the event of a flood, you need to look at all the systems and make sure that they're all okay. You may have to bring in hardware, software. Okay, there are 3 different types of levels. You have level 1 risk level, which is just central computing, not a real big deal. Risk 2 is your campus infrastructure, your 911s, your cable plant. It's a little more severe, right? And level 3 is catastrophic. Or, I'm sorry, I got them backwards. Level 1 is catastrophic. Level 3 is pretty minimal.
Okay, so reverse the numbers, keep the chart.
Common features of the most disaster recovery plans, you're going to have a purpose and a scope just like you do with every other written policy document. You're going to talk about the recovery team and who they are, what their responsibilities are. You're going to talk about outline of emergency procedures and how you're going to restore it. And remember, a DRP is going to be so technically detailed, or should be so technically detailed, that, and I'm not kidding you, someone that has no IT skills could bring your system back up. That's the goal when you write a DRP. You want to make sure it's so technically specific that anyone can bring it up, because if y'all are all in a data center and it comes in a tornado, wipes all of you out, who's going to know your system? That CEO that's sitting over in his mansion on the other side of town says, oh yeah, it's over here in this little safe, and they open up the safe. Well, here you go. You have 24 hours to bring it back up, and I got all the supplies for you. You'll be working yourself to death. Here's an excerpt of a communications room. What you're going to do, it just tells you what's all in that room. How many outlets, how many, what the types of the outlets are. You know, are they the 110 with the reset or just a regular 110? You know, do they have cellular phones, satellite phones? What all technical equipment is in that room? You need to make sure you list them. And the more specific you are, the better off you're going to be. Because if you, let's say you have a server and you just say, well, it's on 2 Dell servers. Okay? Well, what if you had just gotten the top of the line the servers and a tornado comes through? If I'm your CEO, I have no clue about IT, and it says order me 2 Dell servers. What am I going to order you? The cheapest I can get, right? Does that meet the minimum requirements for that system? That's why you need to be technically specific in everything you do. Dell PowerEdge 3250 with quad core technology with 3 gigahertz processors, with 32 3 gigahertz processors, make it a supercomputer. But remember, the DRP, as much as it is technically specific, also needs to be adaptable, right? You need to be able to test them. You need to be able to change them and adapt them to any setting. Okay, if a tornado comes through here and wipes out rows, and wipes out our IT support system over in the business building, are they going to be able to have another building to put it in? Maybe, maybe not. So would they be able to put them out underneath a tent somewhere until they could get the building set back up? Sure. But you're going to have someone around there all the time and make sure that the rain doesn't get to them. What about a back out contingency option? Well, that says if a certain approach doesn't work after you've re-implemented everything, you can also use this type of action. It gives you a secondary choice. Disaster exercises. How many of y'all have ever been in a company that deployed exercises? None of you? I would highly encourage you to look up about disaster exercises because they are so fun to do.
So you're talking about a fire drill, except not a fire drill, but analogous?
You get a everyone gets a message on the computer: exercise, exercise, exercise. Tornado has struck your building. You are all dead. Then you act dead for the rest of the day. You get to go home.
Break time.
But then everyone else has to come up and fix everything that you should have been doing. Does that make sense? You know how long it takes to update Windows, right? Imagine if you have a data center full of Windows servers. You'll be doing a lot of Windows updates before you can install applications again. Disaster exercise objectives. Basically, you want to test the effectiveness in the event of a... You want to do it at least once a quarter so that people are familiar with what they have to do in the event of a disaster. Because what always happens when a tornado comes through? Everyone just loses their mind. They go chaotic. Their lives have been turned upside down. Right? For example, just go back to last May with the Moore tornado. Right?
Which one?
The F5.
Yeah, dude.
The
Terrible.
When it came through and wiped out Moore, everyone there was distraught. I mean, neighborhoods were literally gone. If they weren't, if the fire department and police department and Moore had not been prepared for those type of activities, what would have happened? More chaos, right?
Yeah, we wouldn't.
So that is the purpose of instituting a plan, is so that you're ready in the event that something does come. Redundancy and fault tolerance. Y'all are familiar with those, right? Redundancy, make sure that you have a complete backup, so you're removing all single points of failure. You don't want to have just one part that's going to take you down. For example, I've seen a building downtown, huge backup center for a lot of businesses. They had one line that came into the building.
Talking about the federal building?
In the Bank of Oklahoma, there's a company up that works on the second floor there. And what happens if their AT&T fiber optic lines get cut while they're working on the road?
Bye.
There's no rerouting.
That's their only line in and out.
Oh, like in the movies. Cut the line. Bank robbery.
So tell me, I mean, think of your home. What happens if your cable gets cut? You know? Granted, it's not going to be to the scale as if, this business downtown was. But you have that single point of failure is what I'm talking about. To illustrate. You get DSL then. Well, then you don't have internet. Worth a while. Okay. Here you go. How many times have you heard about the 9 reliabilities? Okay. You have 90%, 1 9. You can be down 36 and a half days if you have a 90% uptime. If I buy a 6-9 reliability, that means that my system is only down for 31 and a half seconds a year. The Federal Reserve, stock market. Actually, the stock market is probably about right here. About an hour a year. Most people get the 5-9 reliability, so you're down 5.26 minutes, 5.25 minutes. That means you can be down 6 seconds a week. Can you reboot a computer in 6 seconds? Not unless you're running Windows 3.1 on these machines. Redundancy and fault tolerance. We get away from that single point of failure by maintaining high uptimes, right? Redundancy planning applies to our service, storage, networks, power, sites. What kind of services do we need to bring the system back up? All right. Server clusters, basically multiple servers that appear as a single server. You can do private or public type of clustering. And you can do them asymmetric or symmetric, whichever way you want. Asymmetric servers perform no function except to be ready if needed. All servers do useful work in a symmetric cluster. If one server fails, the rest of them take on that load. It's kind of like a mesh. You lose one, the rest of the servers you can still function. All right. You have a public cluster that it looks like it's all coming from this one switch. You have the shared disk that's in between, and then you have the private cluster between here. So if server 1 goes down, all of them can still get all the access they need. Hard drives fail all the time. Some organizations are smart and go ahead and keep the same amount of hard drives that are in their servers on hand in case of a failure. What does it mean time between failure?
It's the average amount of time it would take for something to fail.
And be replaced.
Oh.
So once it fails to the time it's replaced, that's the mean time between failure.
Why is the, well, my dad would say variance, I like standard deviation better, but why is that not recorded as well?
It is a reportable feature.
Okay, because otherwise I go, okay, it's...
Would you rather have a 24-hour mean time between failure or a 5-minute mean time between failure?
Well, yeah, it's that, sure, I want the...
You want to be able to show people that within 5 minutes we could have it back up and running if a hard drive fails. If a server fails, we're looking 24 to 48 hours because you got to order it, ship it in, rebuild it. How many of y'all have had network administration?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. When we talk about redundant array of independent disk, RAIDs, RAID 0, basically, it's a striped disk without fault tolerance. All it does is just write them A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And if disk 3 goes out, you lost C, G, K, and O. RAID 1, mirroring. For every drive you have to have a secondary because it mirrors it. It's called disk duplexing. That can get costly, can it? Because you're doubling the amount of drives you have. RAID 5 is really the easiest one. It's an implemented... You have at least 3 disks, and one of them has parity information stored on all the drives. But if you want to get even better, then you do a nested RAID where you actually have a 0 and a 1. But here's RAID 5. You have A's, and then then its parity Where is it? That's not right. Okay. Here's your zeros, parities over here. Or the ones, the twos, the parities in C's, threes, the parities in the B's, and four, the parities in the A's. Does that make sense? I wouldn't have written it that way. Now what you do is the stripe mirror. This is your 0, 1, or commonly known as RAID 10. You have your zeros and your ones. Those are your stripes. And then you mirror it to 2 other drives to be identical. Alright. RAID 0, RAID 1, you need 2 drives. RAID 5, you need 3. And RAID 10, which is 0, 1, you need a minimum of 4. Alright. Redundant networks. What are redundant networks good for? In the event of a failure, right? Because of the connectivity issues today, people are thinking, oh, well, I can only need this one line out. No, you need a secondary line going out. Now, if you're home, at your home, you only need one. But in a business environment, you need to at least have 2 different directions of which your outgoing cable is. Now, they can merge 3 miles down the street, but don't make them merge on your property. UPS. How many of y'all have an UPS at home? UPS, uninterruptible power supply. I'm not talking about the brown truck that comes and delivers packages to you. Offline UPS is the least expensive, simplest solution. All it does is it's charged by the main power supply, and it turns on when the primary power supply is interrupted. And it gives you a couple minutes to shut off your machine. That's essentially all it does. Online is always running off its battery when the main power is on. It's not affected by dips or sags in voltage. And basically it is a very limited type of generator. That's all it essentially is. Then you get into the generators, the backup. You can do it by diesel, propane, or natural gas. I like having a natural gas whole home generator that lights my home in the event of a disaster. I don't have it attached to my house, or have one, because they're about $7,000 a piece. But think about that, $7,000 a piece. By the time you have a power outages, especially here with all the wind and tornadoes here in Oklahoma, how often do you get power outages? Even with the ice storms.
Yeah.
That whole house, natural gas generator will come in handy.
Why do you like natural gas?
Because I don't have to go buy fuel when everyone runs to the fuel. It comes directly to my house. And then I'm sitting there running my whole house on my gas stove. So am I really worried about being able to cook and then have a tankless water heater? I mean, once I get that generator, I don't have to go buy everything else, you know. What is a site? Well, a backup site is a location in which you've identified to restore your services to. Hot site, that is a side-by-side uptime. That would be your 1 plus 0 or your 0 plus 1 RAID type activity. You have your main site and you have a hot site that immediately something goes wrong here. This site is now taking all the traffic. Cold site, least expensive. All it is just an office space, a room, saying, okay, this is your room in the event of a failure. No equipment is in there. You may put equipment in there, but it's your responsibility. Takes a lot to resume. Warm site, the equipment is already installed. It just has no active internet or telecommunication facilities at that point. There are no current backups. It's less expensive than a hot site. And you can turn on the backups in everything within about a day. Data backups. They're essential that you list those in your disaster recovery plan. How often and what type of backups are you going to include? Full, differential, incremental?
Yeah, I love those.
How often should it be backed up? What should be backed up? What should be used? You can do it on tape. You're going to do it over your network. How are you going to do it? Backup software, there's all sorts of different types. Just remember that whatever backup software that you do, it changes the bit value on your file from 1 to 0. I'm sorry, from 0 to 1. The archive bit means it's been changed to 1, means it's been backed up. So it won't get backed up again if it's still on 1. Remember, I already talked about full, differential, and incremental. A full is your total backup. Differential is everything that's happened since the last full backup. And incremental is whatever happened since the last backup period, whether it was a full or a differential or an incremental. All right. Monday, the file was changed. It was backed up. Archive bit was set to 0, saying, hey, I have this. Tuesday, the file was not changed. Wednesday, it was changed. The archive bit got set back to 1. It was backed up and it got set back to 0. Make sense? Y'all with me? Recovery point objective. What is the maximum time the organization can tolerate between backups? The bigger the organization, the less RPOs you're going to have. Recovery time objective. The length of time it will take to recover that backup data. Again, the bigger the organization, the lesser amount of RTO you're going to really have. Magnetic tapes have really been the big way to store things for years. And basically you can get up to 800 gigs on a tape. Pretty inexpensive to do. But the disadvantages that are it's slow, they're high failure, and the data is not encrypted once it gets put on that magnetic tape. So if I steal your backup, what happened? Industrial espionage. Well, just espionage, may not be industrial. Okay, there's a disk-to-disk now where you can do a large hard drive or RAID configuration. You can get better RPO than an RTO than magnetic tape, but it could be subject to failure of the drives. Let's say you have a bad sector on a drive, it's going to get copied over as well. Disk to disk and then disk to tape. Basically, you use the magnetic disk as a storage, temporary storage, and that's all that really is. Continuous data protection. Data backups can be restored immediately, and it will maintain an accurate list of every type of backup that has occurred. Environmental changes. Remember, in your continuity plan, you need to incorporate your environment. What type of HVAC are you going to have? You're going to have proper fire suppression. So in a server room, are you going to use, what type of fire suppression would you use in a server room?
Water.
Actually, the building that we've been working in does do water in their server room. Don't ask me why. I've written them up a couple times on it.
You've written them up.
Needs to be Halon or Dry Chem.
Okay.
Actually, you need Dry Chem because Halon is... Oh, it's a lot easier. You just take a air compressor and go through the machines. With Dry Chem, it just suffocates the room.
Yeah.
And you just spray out your servers and your servers are good to go.
Oh, chlorocoil. That's right.
Proper shielding, you want to make sure that all your cabling is shielded correctly. Basically, you want to make sure you have to have heat, oxygen, and fuel to get the source for a fire, right? If you eliminate one of those, then you'll be good. So, which one do you want to get rid of? Which is going to be the easiest to get rid of?
Oxygen.
Exactly. That's why you have Dry Chem. You know you have A, B, C, D, and K types of fires. Oils. Water sprinkler systems. You have a wet pipe, which means water's already in the pipe, ready to go in the event the head gets knocked. You have an alternate where pipes will fill with water or compressed air at that time. Then you have a dry pipe, which basically is just pressurized with the water being held back. And then you have pre-action, but it has to have some sort of trigger like a smoke alarm before it will actually activate. And then my favorite is the dry chem, where you actually have basically flour or something of that nature you get thrown down there. Then you have clean agents, which unless you're a major corporation, you're not going to have these. High pressure carbon dioxide systems, those are always fun. And basically that's going to be right above your cooking surfaces in restaurants. They can force down that carbon dioxide on you. EMI. How many of y'all have heard about EMPs? Your electromagnetic pulse?
Yeah.
They can knock out your systems.
Yes.
The Faraday cage. Basically, you put a lot of metal enclosures around it to prevent entry or escape of electromagnetic fields so that it can't be bothered by an EMP pulse, which I know is redundant. Electromagnetic pulse.
Oh.
And basically, you're going to use it in the electric type. You can do it in server rooms. I've actually seen a server room that is basically it's kind of like a tornado shelter. It is all encompassed in an iron room. It has iron all the way around it. It's kind of like an MRI room where you have the iron walls. And then when the door shuts, it sucks out all the oxygen out of the room. So don't get stuck in there. Because that eliminates the ability of a fire. And also, it becomes temperature. You have the temperature control in there, and there's a lot less humidity in there because there's no oxygen.
Do they put another gas in there, or?
Does it say if there's no oxygen, how does what do they use for the cold
They have cool pipes.
gas?
Well, it runs through their pipes, but whatever it is, it's a fluid that runs through the pipes and keeps it cool in there.
Yeah, but if the room's a vacuum, it can't move, right?
What do you mean?
The temperature can't escape from the pipes, right?
No, the pipes are running inside the room, so it cools the room. They have HVAC in there. Depending on the type of one you needed, they actually have pipes that do it, kind of like your condenser on your air conditioner. They just run those in the ceilings. It's a real strange setup that I saw. But during the day, they leave the door open, so I mean, it does get nice and chilly in there. They like to keep it around 60 degrees in there. But HVAC, y'all know what that is. That basically all that is your air conditioning. How do you keep things cool? You want to make sure you have a hot aisle, cold aisle layout so that you can have the airflow going through correctly. In other words, you don't want to back servers back up to back up or back to back. You want to have some sort of room for them to be able to cool off. Incident response plan. What happens? What type of incident, or what are you going to do in the event of an incident? If you have an unauthorized disclosure or an unauthorized incident, who are you going to report it to? How is it going to be done? That's part of your continuity plan. So what is forensics? Basically, it's just asking questions and analyzing evidence. That's what forensics is all about. In this instance, we're talking about computer forensics or digital forensics. You look at the amount of digital evidence you're going to have to go through. And it's always high level of scrutiny by the legal profession. So, like I said, when you're doing a DRP and being very technical, write down every step that you do. I put my glove on my left hand. I put my glove on my right hand. I picked up the drive. No, I'm serious. That will keep you out of so much hot water in a courtroom. That's why they always say document, document, document. Document everything you do in the IT field.
So just wear a helmet with a GoPro.
Yes. Well, no, that's the thing is, that way the fingerprints or whatever, that way they know why it's there, you know? That way you're not the guy that killed the person with the socket wrench. Socket wrench?
In the library? Okay, we're not playing Clue here.
Oops.
Okay. Basic forensics. You're going to secure the crime scene, make sure no one is in there that doesn't need to be. You're going to collect all the evidence, writing everything down. You unplug this computer at this time. You know, just make sure you get it all. You're establishing a chain of custody. So if you pass it off to your colleague to take out to the car, they have to sign for it. So it's always been in the correct hands. And then you finally, when you get it all back to the location that you're going to do, you can examine it for evidence. Securing the crime scene, basically, all you're doing is trying to preserve the evidence from being altered in any way, shape, or form. Make sure that once you get there, once you get on scene, you're starting to take pictures of everything. Every step you take, essentially. Make sure the physical surroundings of the building, photographs is taken before anything is even touched. Leave everything where they're at until it's been documented. You want to make sure that every computer cable is labeled. And teams take custody of the entire computer system. And then you will interview the witnesses in that order. Preserving the evidence. Remember, if anything is in RAM, once you unplug it, what happens?
Bye.
So, do you want to investigate the system beforehand? You want to make sure you can get anything off the RAM that you possibly can. All right. You gotta think about the volatility order, so that the most volatile information is taken care of first, and then you back yourself out. First, your register, your cache, your peripheral memories. Then your RAM. Then the network state where you copy the tables, the net stats. Then you copy the running processes, what's running. The establishing chain of custody, like I said, basically you're monitoring where each transaction that it's going. You're examining the evidence to make sure that everything is there that you need to. You look at all sorts of different stuff. You'll get more of forensics analysis in forensics.
Yep.
Any questions on that chapter? Now we're going to talk a little bit about risk mitigation. What is it? How we're going to control it? The types of security policies, and describe how awareness and training can provide increased security. What is risk? What is risk?
It's the chance that the bad thing is going to happen.
Okay. Remember, we're going to have a multifaceted approach to information security. We need to control those types of risks so they don't occur. Develop security policies that will help ensure that they don't occur, and then provide user awareness and training. Remember back in Chapter 1 we talked a little bit about risk with threat agent, vulnerability, and risk? You all remember these terms because you're going to see them on your final? What is privilege? It's your right to do something, correct?
Yeah.
Privilege management. If I'm a privilege manager, I'm going to be able to say, Aaron, you cannot access this file. Privilege auditing means you go back and you validate the people who have certain access, they only have access to those documents. User access rights. Change management. What is change management? Well, it's the documentation of every type of change that you do to your system. So that in the software development lifecycle, when you're adding a new section or a new part to your application, you're changing your system. You document everything that has been changed so you have a record of it. That's all it is, just the methodology of changing your system architecture, file, document classifications, anything like that. Change management team, basically that's going to be your team that evaluates and changes all your aspects of IT. And they're going to review the proposed changes and look at the risk, do a risk assessment on it. They'll either approve, deny, defer, or withdraw the request. And then they'll communicate proposed and approved changes to everybody. Incident management, we just talked a little bit about that. It's a response to unauthorized incident. Incident handling, you have planning, coordination, communications, and planning functions that are going to resolve that incident. So in case George comes in and breaks into the room, leaves his fingerprints all over the computers in here, we come in here, we find out that it was him, what's going to happen to George? We're going to lock him up for the rest of his life, right?
Too bad, sucker.
Complete insanity.
You plead.
I'll give you a good one.
What is the security policy? Well, you're going to get a lot of this in ESM. But security policy, basically it is to help you eliminate risk. You're saying, here's what we're going to do. We're evaluating these. We're going to implement these controls so that we do not have this risk. You have an inherent risk anytime you turn on a computer. So, what are some things you need to think about when working with security policies? Well, you need to understand what it's about. If I set an acceptable use policy, define an acceptable use policy. George?
What you allow people to do and define what would be forbidden and what may be a security breach.
Okay. You need to know how to balance trust and control. You need to understand the process for designing a policy. And you need to know what the different types of policies are. So, what is the security policy in itself? Well, it defines the organizational scope or protections to ensure that the system and its assets face minimal risks. All right? You don't want to give too many risks, allow too many risks. That's why when you get an SSAC, you'll realize the scope of how the risk management and controls go through. Is we're going to do an audit of a system, and then you're going to try to attack another system based on its, you'll be able to attack a different system. Try to figure out its vulnerabilities. And see what risk they allowed, and see if you can't breach that. Does that make sense? That's what SSAC is a little bit about. You have two different types of definitions. You have high level and low level. High level is a set of management statements, basically. Here's my vision and mission statement. Here's how we're going to protect our network. Okay. Remember, high, 30,000 foot view. Lower level, those are going to be your technical controls. How are you going to do a specific task? Security policy functions. You can document the management's overall intention and direction. It's going to detail specific risks about how to address them. It's going to talk about how to direct employee behavior, create a security awareness organizational culture, and ensure employee behavior is directed and monitored. Now, y'all remember from Cyber Protect, how well were those people that were social engineered? Very horrible, right? That's your typical user. They don't really know. You can train them, but by the time you get to about the third time, they're just sitting there clicking through it. There's basically three different types of trust. You trust everyone, trust no one, or trust some. Right? All, none, or some, right? A security policy attempts to make that the right level of trust for each type of object. You're going to have a standard, a guideline, and a policy. You need to know the difference between the three. What is a standard? Well, it's a collection of specific requirements that everyone must meet. ISO standards. Okay? EIA, TIA 568Bs. Everyone must cable it in that particular way to meet that standard, right? A guideline. If your parents say, I'm going to give you a guideline, which I've never heard a parent say that. That is just a suggestion of an approach. Okay. Then you have policies. Those are specific requirements that you as an organization will write that everyone must meet. What are the three phases of security policy cycle? Vulnerability assessment, which is what we're going to do in Tulsa. Asset identification, threat identification, vulnerability appraisal, risk assessment, risk mitigation. We create a security policy based on that information from the risk management study, and then review ever so often that policy for compliance. So here you go. You get a vulnerability assessment, you write a policy, then you validate it for compliance and monitoring, evaluate it. If it fails, you go back and, keep testing those until they're good all the way around. They'll change all the time, trust me. Security policy statements must be implementable and enforceable. They must be concise and easy to understand in balance of protection and productivity. You don't want to lock them out so much they can't do anything, but you don't want to give them too much to where they can do a lot. Security policy should outline how violations are going to be handled, what is covered in the policy, and why the policy is necessary. Security policy design should be a work of a team, not just one individual. The development team should have a senior level administrator, member of the legal staff, member of management who will be the one to enforce the policy, and then representative from the user community saying, hey, this is going to be too much for us. All right. The team should first decide on the policy goals and the scope. Then you have to do what we call in legal terminology due care or due process to ensure that the obligations imposed on owners and operators of those assets do not destroy the productivity. And the owners must exercise reasonable care of the assets to protect them. In other words, you have to find that happy median. That's why every business security policy is different from business to business. There's not one overarching policy. Policy development guidelines. You got to notify users in advance of development of any reasons for a new security policy. So if I'm going to create a new type of policy, I need to let them know in advance of why. You want to provide effective users an opportunity to review and comment on that policy prior to it being documented or deployed, and give users with the responsibility the authority to carry out their responsibilities. Some of the security policies you'll see are the acceptable use policy, privacy policy, HR policy, password management policies, disposal and destruction policies, classification policies, and ethics policies. Those are at minimum what you should have. Here's some of the other types. Antivirus policy, audit policies, email policies, database policies, DMZ policies, email retention policies, extranet policies, information sensitivity, router security, server security, VPN security, wireless communication. As you can tell, there's a lot of policies that you can put into place. So what is an acceptable use policy? We talked about that. That guides what users can and cannot do on a system. Privacy policy. How are we going to put safeguards into place to protect the PII, the personal identifiable information? Then security-related human resources policy. Basically, it includes statements about how the employee's information and technology resources will be addressed. And usually it's addressed when you get hired on. Here's a privacy policy. Basically, you can read that if you want to. The human resource policy may or may not include due process clauses. Password management complexity processes or policies. You got to say how long the passwords are going to be, the complexity, the history, the length, the time, the difference between strong and weak passwords. You need to be able to tell all that. Here's a weak characteristics. Here's what you need to put out. You need to have at least this minimum requirements. Disposal and destruction process policy addresses the disposition of hard drives or any personal identifiable information. Classification of information policy, designed to produce standardized framework for classifying information assets, whether these are high, low, or medium. defining ethics can be difficult. Why? Because everyone has different ethics, right? We have a set of values, a set of morals, a set of ethics. So, values, it's a person's fundamental belief and principle, right? Everyone has a group of that has a set of values or principles or beliefs. Morals. It's values attributed to a belief system that helps individuals distinguish from right and from wrong. We all have our certain moral compass, correct? That guides us and says, murder is wrong. 95% of people believe murder is wrong. Going directly after someone, correct? Now, getting executed for doing that, it kind of flip-flops, right? Especially in Oklahoma and Texas. Ethics. All it is a study of what group of people understand to be good and right behavior. Or is it ethical? Well, define ethics. How's it to be used? An organization does not set an employee's values. It does set, here's what you will do. This is our ethical behavior. In other words, if you go back to remember Britney Spears a few years ago, she had a Pepsi contract and she got photographed by paparazzi drinking a Coke. Pepsi closed off the contract. Because in their ethics says you will only drink Pepsi products.
So she should have opened a Pepsi and poured it out, then poured the Coke in the Pepsi.
Or
Okay. Don't get unethical here. Ethics are a written code of conduct, guidelines, guides employees in decision making, serves as a communicated tool to reflect an organizational commitment.
Alicia Keys said a BlackBerry promotional tweet or something from an iPhone. That's the only thing I can think of.
I mean, for example, you have a certain dress code at a company because they believe that it brings out the best in someone to dress up. You don't. Did you break their ethics? Or you got fired, and so you walk right over to their competitor and bring in all that information that you had gained from that company over to another company. Is that ethical?
that might be illegal.
Well, it is illegal.
Non-disclosure or whatever.
Well, if you didn't sign a non-disclosure,
Haha, suckers.
what you do is if you're going to do that, and you want to get paid wazoo, you just drop your key off, said I'm gone, don't sign anything, and just leave. You just never use them as a reference.
I had to beforehand. Before I got the job, I had to sign a thing.
You would help.
Had a job thing.
Well, see, he violated the ethics agreement. That's why he no longer has the job.
No.
Okay.
It's because I sucked at the job.
Awareness and training. How hard is it to teach people?
Very.
No, it's easy to teach people. It's, do they want to learn it? Do they listen? How many people are going to be up at 8 o'clock in the morning for an ethics training? Okay, you kind of get the drift here. You got to make sure that what you're teaching they can use in practical purposes so they remember. Compliance, you got to make sure that people are compliant with your policies. Check occasionally. Notify them that they're in violation of compliance. And until they become compliant, you can kick them off the system and they're not going to be productive. And as not being productive, I'm not paying you. When you show that dollar sign to their pocketbook, it usually makes people want to be a little bit more compliant. Threat awareness, peer-to-peer networks. Aaron.
Yes.
How many peers do you have?
Peer-to-peer network is one of the most prevalent threats that you're going to have because you never know what you're actually getting when you share things.
Emails.
Social networking is number 2. Websites that facilitate them are becoming prime targets, such as Facebook, MySpace, and Zynga, and whatever the other ones were.
Zynga.
I had one. Shoot.
Do it?
I
You
wasn't allowed to have those.
were you in elementary when that was popular?
Yeah.
Reason social networks are sites are popular with attackers because everyone puts out their personal information. Maybe that's why you need to put your wrong birth date out there. Wrong information. So no one can social engineer you.
Well, as we
Tell them
know,
you're
that's
12.
illegal in Georgia. I'm referencing cyber law network security, guys.
Not on social networking sites is not. Not what he was doing. Reason social networking sites are popular with attackers because they're generally trusting and sites are vulnerable and people are very trustworthy with trusting with their information. Security tips for social networking sites. Make sure you know who you say is your friends, that they're really your friends. Not like your professors who will social engineer you.
Friggin' Dewey.
Show limited friends a reduced version of your profile. Make sure that you only give access to those that you really want.
Don't have a social network account.
Opportunities for security education and training.
If you do, just don't be stupid with it.
Make sure that you train them when they first get on, Aaron. And after any type of vulnerability, Kristen, when an employee is promoted, during retreats, I've never had an annual department retreat. Maybe I need to bring that up. When new user software is installed or when user hardware is upgraded. I really wouldn't worry about these as much because you would be reminding them every day. Learn traits. Make sure you know how people contact people. The different types of learning styles: auditory, visual, kinesthetic, which means you actually physically do it. You can do a pedagogical approach, which is basically what I do, is a classic teaching method, but also do an androidical, the art of helping an adult learn, except, well, some of you are adults. They're actually all adults, but... Is there any questions? No?
Why is the world so terrible?
That has nothing to do with network security.
Oh,
No, there are no questions.
All right. I believe I have set your final exam to open Sunday at midnight.
The 11th, I think is what it said.
That would be Sunday.
that's what
At
it
12
was.
a.m.
Yes. And it goes to the 14th. And I believe I put it at 10, maybe give you till 11:59 p.m. that night. You have one shot at it. That's it.
Do we have any more class?
Is it time?
It is a 90-minute time test.
They're gonna get 20 minutes to do a 120 question test.
Huh? I can make it happen.
Yeah, no.
Don't open your mouth.
You know, I didn't realize all the quizzes you put you put 100 in. I went back and I did some.
They lowered your grade, didn't it?
Yeah, I had to keep doing it until I got 100.
No, I was going to change them back. Everyone's going to get hundreds on all those.
It's only 90 minutes.
90 minutes.
That's not too bad.
Well, you've had the study guide all semester.
Got to read in blocks.
Yeah, but if you had it in class, it would be longer than that.
I can tell you you can have a 30-minute final if I wanted to.
I'm saying in the catalog, it tells you when the
Yeah,
final's given and gives
it gives you 2 hours to take it
Right.
if I wanted to. I have to give you 90 minutes so that if I do a time and a half, I still give within that 2 hours for the students that would need a disability. That's why 90 minutes is usually what you're going to have as a max.
Oh, okay. Now it's not just a number, it's also a thing. What?
All right. Any questions?
Now it's not just a number, it's a thing.
When's the last day to turn in the cyber protect?
I was going to give y'all Wednesday to work on it if y'all wanted to, but there's not an official. We're not going to meet as an official class. I will come up here and open up the door I'll still be down in office. I'll make it office hour time so that you can still come in and see me. But there's not going to be, you don't have to show up for it on Wednesday. Does it make sense? You,
When's the last day we can bring that to you though?
you'll submit it in the Dropbox the 14th. Whatever the last day of the final is on there, I think is what I got it set on. And if it's a different time, Daphne, just email me, let me know, and I'll reset it to that.
Well, it's not due, it doesn't have any due date, that's
Oh,
all I
okay.
know.
Yeah, just
14th?
yeah. At the end of the final exam time, I'll start grading, and that'll be it. I would like to get them in beforehand so that you know what you need to make on the final. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if you get it into me before you do your final, then you can calculate whatever you submit as your total percentage comes up at the top. Take that percentage from 50 points. So it'd be 50 times, if you got 83%, 0.83. And that will tell you exactly what score you're going to get, and that's how many extra bonus points you're getting for the semester. Does that make sense? So if you get 100% on it, you get all 50 points. But if you get 83, you're only going to get 83% of those 50 points. And then you can add up your points and then figure out what you're going to have to make to get your A or your B or whatever you want in the class. Or whatever, I should say whatever you're satisfied with. In Aaron's case, a C. So
Illegal!
what's illegal?
I don't know. Yelling illegal, probably.
Alrighty.